Hazardous waste identification and proper waste management practices. Hazardous waste is defined based on specific properties: toxicity, reactability, ignitability, and corrosivity. Let us define what is corrosivity, ignitability, reactability, and toxicity. Corrosive is the tendency of a substance to cause damage or deterioration to other material upon contact, typically through chemical reaction. Ignitability Ignitability refers to a propensity or ability of a substance to catch fire or ignite when exposed to a heat source, spark, or flame. Reactability refers to a tendency of a substance to undergo chemical reaction, often rapidly or violently, when exposed to certain conditions such as heat, light, pressure, or contact with other substance. Toxicity refers to a degree to which a substance can cause harm to a living organisms upon exposure. Segregation, storage, and proposal practices. Proper segregation, storage, and disposal are crucial to minimize environment and risk health. Hazardous waste should always keep separate from non-hazardous waste to prevent contamination. Regulatory requirements. Regulatory requirements for waste management include classification, permitting storage, transportation, treatment, and disposal guidelines. Facilitate handling hazardous waste must comply with those regulations to protect the environment and public health. In conclusion, understanding how to identify the hazardous waste and following proper waste management practice is essential for safer environment.
So, good day, classmates. Today I will be discussing hazard communication. So, first, let's define what is hazard communication. Hazard communication refers to the set of processes and procedures that employers and importers must implement in the workplace to effectively communicate hazards associated with chemicals. It is a requirement by the Occupational Safety and Health Hazards, or OSHA, in the United States. So, under the hazard communication standards, chemical manufacturers and importers are required to provide labels and safety data sheets with hazard information for their products. Workers are also required to understand and be trained on how to interpret these labels and safety data sheets. The HCS is aligned with the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals, or GHS, which aims to improve chemical safety in the workplace by providing a standardized approach to classifying and communicating hazards. So, why is there a need for hazard communication? Hazard communication is important for several reasons. So, here are some key points: safety and health. Hazard communication helps create a safe and healthy workplace by ensuring that workers are aware of the hazards associated with chemicals they may come in contact with. This knowledge allows them to take necessary precautions and protect themselves from potential harm. Next is the right to understand. Hazard communication standard not only gives workers the right to know about hazards, but also the right to understand them. By providing clear and consistent communication about chemical hazards through labels and safety data sheets, workers can better comprehend the risks involved. Next is compliance with regulations. So, hazard communication is a requirement by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or OSHA, in the United States. Employers and importers must comply with the hazard communication standard to ensure they meet the legal obligations for protecting their workers. Next is global harmonization. The HCS is aligned with the globally harmonized system of classification and labeling of chemicals. This alignment ensures a standardized approach to classifying and communicating hazards globally, promoting consistency and facilitating international trade. Next is training and awareness. Hazard communication training helps employees recognize chemical hazards and understand how to protect themselves from exposure. It equips them with the knowledge and skills necessary to handle hazardous chemicals safely. So, these are some of the reasons why hazard communication is important in the workplace. It helps promote safety, compliance, and a better understanding of chemical hazards among workers. So, when, where, and how are hazards communicated? Hazards are communicated in various situations and at different stages. Here are some common instances as to when, where, and how hazards are communicated. Number one, product labels. Information is communicated through labels affixed to chemical containers. These labels provide important details about the hazards associated with the chemical, such as the type of hazard, precautionary measures, and required personal protective equipment. Next is safety data sheets. Hazards are communicated through SDS or safety data sheets, also known as material safety data sheets. SDS provide comprehensive information about the chemical, including its physical and chemical properties, health hazards, handling and storage recommendations, emergency procedures, and more. Next, training programs. Hazards are communicated during training programs conducted by employers. These programs educate workers on the potential hazards they may encounter in the workplace, how to identify them, and the necessary precautions to prevent accidents or injuries. Next is hazard communication programs. So employers develop hazard communication programs to ensure effective communication of hazards in the workplace. These programs include policies, procedures, and protocols for handling, storing, and using hazardous chemicals safely. Incident reporting. Hazards may be communicated through incident reporting systems. So when accidents, spills, or other incidents occur involving hazardous chemicals, it is important to report them promptly to raise awareness and take appropriate corrective actions. Next is ongoing communication. So hazards are communicated on an ongoing basis through regular communication channels in the workplace. This can include safety meetings, safety posters, email updates, and other forms of communication to keep workers informed about potential hazards and any changes in safety protocols. So it's important to note that hazard communication is a continuous process and should be integrated into daily work practices to ensure that workers are consistently informed and aware of the hazards they may encounter. So let's now talk about the globally harmonized system for chemical labeling and classification, or the GHS. So what is GHS? GHS, or Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, is an internationally agreed upon system to standardize chemical hazard classification and communication. GHS arose from an international mandate during the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development as a response to the ILO Chemicals Convention of the 1990 and the ILO Chemicals Recommendation of the 1990. The adoption of these instruments necessitates a system for hazard classification and labeling. The GHS was developed over more than a decade and continues to evolve. The ILO, in close collaboration with its constituents, played a crucial or critical role serving as the focal point for the technical work on hazard communication. So GHS includes criteria for classifying substances and mixtures according to their physical, health, and environmental hazards. GHS also include requirements for communication of the hazards through labels and safety data sheets. So next, what are the objectives of GHS? Number one, enhance the protection of human health and the environment by providing an internationally comprehensible system for hazard communication. Next is provide a recognized framework for those countries without an existing system. Next, reduce the need for testing and evaluation of chemicals and facilitate international trade in chemicals. So how does GHS contribute to occupational safety and health? Step 1, hazard communication. Step hazard classification and communication is precisely at the core of the GHS, and for this reason is a necessary component of the safe use of chemicals in the workplace. So it involves classification of the chemicals based on their intrinsic properties and hazard communication through labels, SDS, and training. Step 2, risk evaluation. In this step, they assess how the chemical is used at the workplace. They also take into account existing control measures already in place to reduce the risks. And thirdly, while hazards are intrinsic to a given chemical, risks are not, and so will vary depending on the levels of the risk reduction measures applied. So step 3, safe use of chemicals. If the risk reduction measures applied are sufficient, the level of risk is acceptable, and this can be considered as the safe use of chemicals. If not, it is necessary to identify what further risk control measures are needed to reduce the risk to an acceptable and safe use level. So GHS covers three categories. So first, let's take a look at physical hazards. Physical hazards includes explosives, flammable gases, aerosols and chemicals under pressure, oxidizing gases, gases under pressure, flammable liquids, flammable solids, self-reactive substances and mixtures, pyrophoric liquids, pyrophoric solids, self-heating substances and mixtures, substances and mixtures which in contact with water emit flammable gases, oxidizing liquids, oxidizing solids, organic peroxides, corrosives to metals, desynthesized explosives. Health hazards. Under health hazards, we have acute toxicity, skin corrosion, irritation, serious eye damage, eye irritation, respiratory or skin sensitization, germ cell mutagenicity, carcinogenicity, reductive toxicity, single specific target organ toxicity for single exposure, specific target organ toxicity for repeated exposure and aspiration hazard. We also have environmental hazards. So these are hazardous to the aquatic environment and hazardous to the ozone layer. So what is the scope of the GHS? The GHS covers all hazardous chemicals at the workplace in all of the stages of the product life cycle, including production, storage, transport, handling, recycling, and disposal. The GHS, depending on national legislation, may also include the use of chemicals in consumer products, which are often used in many sectors of the world of work. This can include, for example, chemical use to disinfect workplaces or the use of paint in the construction sector, to name a few. So, what are the target audiences of the GHS in the world of work? Governments, particularly the competent authority responsible for establishing policies and regulations. We also have producers, suppliers, and users of chemicals, which are responsible for the identification and classification of the chemicals and preparation of labels and SDS and passing on that information. We also have employers who are responsible for implementing comprehensive chemical safety programs in the workplace, and workers. They are the target audience of the labels and SDS. So, how do we implement GHS? Governments should implement GHS by developing a national GHS implementation strategy, by establishing and or updating regulations on chemicals based on the GHS, by evaluating the effectiveness and compliance of regulations related to the GHS. Governments should also ratify and implement relevant international labor standards on chemicals to further reinforce the main provisions of the GHS. For producers and suppliers, they should classify or reclassify chemicals in accordance with the GHS. They should develop labels and SDS in accordance with the GHS. And they should also share appropriate chemical safety information on classification and labeling as relevant and required. For employers, they should ensure that all chemicals used at work are labeled according to the GHS. they should provide the SDS in line with the GHS for workers, inform and train workers about the GHS communication elements and the handling and use of chemicals to ensure that workers' right to know is fully met. And they also need to apply risk assessment procedures to ensure that appropriate OSH measures following the hierarchy of controls are followed. So these may include engineering controls, administrative controls, and or appropriate personal protective equipment, including information and training on its use, maintenance, storage, and disposal. As for the workers, workers should receive instruction and attend training about chemical safety, particularly to ensure understanding of the information contained in the GHS labels and the SDS. They should also request instruction and training in situations where it is not initially provided, and workers should use and apply information on risk control measures gained in instruction and training on GHS labels and SDS. Now, this includes using PPE appropriately according to instruction and training. So, how are hazards communicated in the GHS? There are two ways to communicate hazards in the GHS. These are SDS or safety data sheets and labels. So, these labels and safety data sheets, they are both critical components of the product safety and hazard communication. They serve different purposes and contain different types of information. So first, let's take a look at safety data sheets. Safety data sheets provide detailed information about a product's properties, including its hazards and safety precautions. They are structured in a 16-section format, including detailed information on the product's composition, first aid measures, firefighting measures, accidental release measures, handling and storage, exposure controls, personal protection, physical and chemical properties, and more. So the next 2 points is very important. They are typically provided separately from the product, often as a downloadable document from the manufacturer's website. Again, they are typically provided separately from the product, often as a downloadable document from the manufacturer's website. And lastly, they are intended for use by professionals who need to understand the detailed safety and handling procedures for a product. I will repeat that last point. They are intended for use by professionals who need to understand the detailed safety and handling procedures of a product. So an SDS has 16 sections: identification, hazards identification, composition or information on ingredients, first aid measures, firefighting measures, accidental release measures, handling and storage, exposure controls and protective protection, physical and chemical properties, stability and reactivity, toxicological information, ecological information, disposal considerations, transport information, regulatory information, and other information. Let's talk about labels. Product labels provide immediate, unlike unlike its counterpart, the STS, which provide detailed information. Product labels provide immediate key information about the hazards of a product. They are usually attached to the product packaging. They include information such as product name, manufacturer details, hazard pictograms, signal words, and hazard statements, precautionary statements, and emergency phone numbers. So they are designed to be easily understandable at a glance and provide essential safety information to anyone handling the product. So I will repeat the last 2 points, which mainly differentiates product labels from SDS. So product labels, they are usually attached to the product packaging, unlike safety data sheets that are separate from the product and oftentimes a downloadable document from the manufacturer's website. Also, product labels are designed to be easily understandable at a glance and provide essential safety information. Take note of this, to anyone handling the product, unlike safety data sheets that are intended for use by professionals. All in all, in summary, while product labels provide immediate essential safety information, safety data sheets provide a more comprehensive set of information for professionals who need to understand the detailed safety and handling procedures for a product. Both are crucial for the safe use and handling of products. Okay, now let's take a look at the six elements of a GHS label. So on your right side is an example of a uh, product GHS label. So it has the following elements: the product identifier, which is acetone; supplier identification, which can be found most of the time at the bottom of the label. Uh, this includes the product's manufacturer's name, contact number, and most of the time the address. And next we have hazard pictograms. So these are features which we will be discussing the meaning in a few moments. We also have signal words. These signal words, it is either danger or warning. Next, we have hazard statements. These are phrases that describes the nature of the hazards, including where appropriate the degree of the hazard. So hazard statements, most of the time, these are statements of the pictograms. Next, we have precautionary statements. These are phrases or pictograms that describes recommended measures that should be taken to minimize or prevent adverse effects resulting from exposure to hazardous product. Now, let's go to pictograms and their descriptions. So, hazard pictograms alert us to the presence of a hazardous chemical. The pictograms help us to know that the chemicals we are using might cause harm to people or the environment. These hazard pictograms appear in the shape of a diamond with a distinctive red border and white background. One or more pictograms might appear on the labeling of a single chemical. So, I have the first pictogram, a flame over circle. So it identifies oxidizers. Oxidizers are chemicals that facilitate burning or make fires burn hotter or longer. Next, we have the flame. Flammable. These are flammable materials or substances liable to self-ignite when exposed to water or air or pyrophoric, or which emit flammable gas. Also have the exploding bomb. These are explosive, including organic peroxides and highly unstable material at risk of exploding even without exposure to air or most of the time self-reactives. We also have skull and crossbones. These are substances such as poisons and highly concentrated acids which have an immediate and severe toxic effect. We also have corrosion. These are materials causing skin corrosion, burns, or eye damage on contact, or that are corrosive to metals. We have gas cylinder. Gases stored under pressure such as ammonia or liquid nitrogen. We also have the health hazard pictogram. These are cancer-causing agent or substance with respiratory, reproductive, or organ toxicity that causes damage over time. So we also have the environment pictogram. These are chemicals toxic to aquatic wildlife. And lastly, the exclamation mark pictogram. So an immediate skin, eye, or respiratory tract irritant or narcotic. So as I've said, unlike SDS that are mainly intended for professionals, product labels contain information to anyone handling the product. For an example of a product label, let's not look further. Instead, let's take a look at a very common product that most of us have in our homes. This product is the Baygon Multi-Insect Spray. So as I've said, product labels are attached to the product's packaging. So on this product, the Baygon Multi-Insect Spray, the label can be found at the back of the packaging. Now, let's take a look at the elements of this product label. So, the product identifier, it is a multi-insect spray. Number two, the supplier identification, which can be found at the bottom of the label. We also have the hazard pictogram. So at the lower right corner, we can see the flame pictogram, which means that this product contains flammable materials. As for the signal word, I was unable to find the signal word for this product. However, it does not mean that this product has violated the GHS standard. On my research, pesticide products that are not required to display a signal word are those that fall into the lowest toxicity category by all routes of exposure, either oral, dermal, inhalation, and other effects like eye and skin irritation. So this product probably falls under into that category. Next, hazard statements. The precautions part of this Bygone product says that the product is flammable. So that's the hazard statement. And lastly, last element is the precautionary statements. So can you see the part there that says first aid treatment? Yeah, that's the product precautionary statement. So, well, that concludes my report. That concludes hazard communication. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. This is my topic that risk assessment and management for safety. What is risk assessment? Risk assessment is a function within occupational safety and health. Risk management that focus on identifying potential hazards. The goal is to identify hazards, then analyze and evaluate the risks they create. What is risk management? Risk management in OSH involves identifying hazards, evaluating and analyzing risks, and taking action to eliminate or control a non-eliminating risk to minimize injury and illness potential. Why is risk important in safety? Risk is a significant uncertainty in organizations, and safety professionals can help identify and manage risk before incidents occur, thereby promoting safety, reducing injury rates, and maximizing safety program returns. Hazard identification. Hazard identification is a part of the process used to evaluate if any particular situation, item, thing, etc. may have the potential to cause harm. The term often used to describe the full process is the risk assessment. I have run three processes for hazard identification. First, identify hazard and risk factors that have the potential to cause harm. Second, analyze and evaluate the risks associated with the hazard risk analysis and risk evaluation. The third, determine appropriate ways to eliminate the hazard or control the risk when the hazard cannot be eliminated. When should hazard identification be done? The first, during design and implementation. The second, designing a new process or procedure. Third, purchasing and installing a new machinery. Fourth, before tasks are done. Fifth, checking equipment or following processes. The sixth, reviewing surroundings before a shift. Seventh, while tasks are being done. The eighth, be aware of changes, abnormal conditions, or sudden emissions. The ninth, during inspections. 10th, formal, informal, supervisor, health and safety committee. 11th, after incidents. And the last one, near misses or minor events injuries. What types of hazards are there? The first one is biological. Biological as a bacteria, viruses, insects, plants, birds, animals, and humans. The second one is a chemical. Chemicals depends to the physical, chemical, and toxic properties of the chemical. The third one is ergonomic. Ergonomic repetitive movements, improper setup of workstation. The fourth one is a physical. Physical has a radiation, magnetic fields, temperature extremes, pressure extremes, high pressure or vacuum, and the last one is noise. The fifth one is psychosocial. Psychosocial has stress and violence. The sixth one is safety. safety sa sleeping, sweeping hazards, inappropriate machine guarding, equipment malfunctions or breakdowns. Exposure assessment. Exposure assessment is the process of estimating or measuring the magnitude, frequency, and duration of exposure to an agent, along with the number of characteristics of the population exposed. Ideally, it describes the sources, routes, pathways, and uncertainty in the assessment. Exposure duration, which is the length of the time involved in each discrete exposure event, and is the applicable the length of the time over which two or more discrete exposure events occur. Exposure chronology. Exposure chronology helps determine the most appropriate statistical metric for exposure or observed dose estimate based on the toxicological endpoint. It helps determine the timing of exposure events relative to a time frame of toxicological relevance, such as a life stage for a particular adverse effect. Exposure patterns. Exposure patterns are characterized by the relation between sources and exposure and human activity patterns. These patterns include time and location, and can be temporal, spatial, demographic, and behavioral specific. Exposure assessors differentiate the contribution of different sources and routes, allowing for a person to be exposed to the same chemical through multiple routes and microenvironments over a single day or weeks. Risk evaluation and risk management strategies. Process of comparing the results of risk analysis with risk criteria to determine whether the risk and or its magnitude are acceptable or tolerable. Steps needed to manage risk. Risk management is step-by-step process for controlling health and safety risks caused by hazards in the workplace. First one is identifying hazards. Second one is assess the risks. The third one is to control the risks. The fourth one, record the findings, and the last one is to review the controls. Identify hazards. Look around your workplace and think about what may cause of harm. First one is how people and how plants and equipments are used. Second one, what chemical and substance are used. The third one, what safe or unsafe work practices exist. The fourth one, the general state of your premises. Identify hazards. Look back at your accident and ill health records, as this can be helps you identify less obvious hazards. Take account of non-routine operations such as a maintenance, cleaning of your changes or production cycles. Vulnerable workers. Some workers have particular requirements, for example, young workers, migrant workers, new or expectant mothers, and people with disabilities. Talk to workers involves your employees, as they will usually have a good ideas. Thus, identifying hazards will help you, not only yourself, but your surroundings and your coworkers. Assess the risks. Once you have identified the hazards, decide how likely it is that someone could be harmed and how serious it could be. This is assessing the level of risk. Decide. This is the first one. Who might be harmed and how? Second, what you are already doing to control the risk. Third one, what further action you need to take to control the risk. Report 1. Who needs to carry out the action? Tip 1. When the action is needed by. Control the risk. Look and what you're already doing and the controls you already have in place. Ask yourself, can I get rid of the hazard altogether? If not, how can I control the risk so that harm is the unlikely? If you need further control, or consider redesigning the job. Second one, replacing the materials, machinery, or process. Third one, organizing your work to reduce exposure to the materials, machinery, or process. The fourth one, identifying and implementing practical measures needed to work safely. The fifth one, providing personal protective equipment and making sure workers wear it. What reasonable practical means? Implement identified controls to protect people from harm, balancing risk levels with necessary measures in terms of money, time, or trouble. Record findings. If you employ 5 or more people, you must record your significant findings, including the hazards, things that may cause harm, who might be harmed and how, and what are doing the controls the risk. Review the controls. You must review the controls you have put in place to make sure they are working. You should also review them if first, they may no longer be effective. The second one is there are changes in the workplace that could be lead the new risks such as the changes. The third one, staff, part, a process, and the fifth, the substance or equipment used. Also consider a review if your workers have spotted any problems or there have been any accidents or near misses. Update your risk assessment record with any changes you make. Thank you for listening for my topic.
Laboratory safety practices. What is laboratory safety and why is it important? Laboratory safety involves recognizing and evaluating hazards, assessing risks, selecting appropriate personal protective equipment, and performing the experimental work in a safe manner. Laboratory safety refers to the precautions, procedures, and protocols put in place to minimize the risk of accidents, injuries, and exposure to hazardous materials or conditions in a laboratory setting. It's crucial because it protects the health and well-being of laboratory personnel, prevents damage to equipment and facilities, and ensures the accuracy and reliability of experimental results. Personal protective equipment or PPE, chemical handling storage, equipment safety, emergency procedures, waste management, risk assessment, and lastly, security measures. What is PPE? Wearing personal protective equipment or PPE can shield you from exposure to both physical and chemical hazards. It's critical to understand the hazardous compounds you operate with or could encounter and to modify your personal protective equipment appropriately. These are just a few examples of laboratory safety practices, and adherence to these protocols is essential to maintain safe working environment and prevent accidents or injuries. The first one is gloves. Laboratory gloves provide a critical barrier between skin and potential hazards, including chemical, biological, or radioactive substances. They help prevent burns, cuts, abrasions, and exposure to harmful microorganisms. Second one is eye protection. These are tight-fitting eye protection that completely covers the eyes and provides protection from chemical splashes, impact, and dust. Goggles are routinely used for protection against chemical splash hazards. Use of concentrated corrosive material in bulk chemical transfer. The third one is closed-toe shoes. protect feet from any injuries and burns that can arise. They even provide a shield from any cuts from any glass or such objects. The fourth one is laboratory coats. Provide protection of skin and personal clothing from incidental contact and small splashes. Prevent the spread of contamination outside the laboratory. Once we have collected our PPE, these are just a couple more things to gather before we begin moving those chemical containers around. Survey your surroundings and take notice of any potential trip hazards and locations of work stations where others are busy. Make sure exits, passageway, and emergency equipments are clear and free of stored materials. Locate and have close at hand a full spill kit with appropriate absorbent materials, neutralizing agents, clean up utensils, and waste containers. Safe handling, storage, and disposal of chemicals. Safe handling, storage, and disposal of chemicals refer to practices and procedures aimed at minimizing the risks associated with the use, storage, and disposal of hazardous substances. These practices are essential to protect human health, prevent accidents, and mitigate environmental harm. Every chemical needs to be kept in a secure, safe place. It is necessary to store hazardous chemical below eye level. Chemicals should not be kept on the ground, on windows sills, or on balconies, unless you are adding to or distributing a chemical. Keep containers closed. Example: label all chemical containers fully. We recommend including the owner's or user's name along with the date received. Second is provide a specific storage space for each chemical and ensure return after each use. The third one is store volatile, toxics, and odorous chemicals in ventilated cabinets. Please check with your environmental health and safety personnel for specific guidance. Next is store flammable liquids in approved flammable liquid storage cabinets. Small amounts of flammable liquids may be stored in the open room. Check with your local authority allowable limits. Next is separate all chemicals, especially liquids, according to compatible groups. Follow all precautions regarding storage of incompatible materials. Post a chemical compatibility chart or reference both in the lab and the next to chemical storage rooms. Next is use appropriate resistant secondary containers for corrosive materials. This protects the cabinets and will catch any leaks or spills due to breakage. Seal containers tightly to prevent the escape of vapors. Use designated refrigerators for storing chemicals. Label these refrigerators chemical storage only, no food. Never store flammable liquids in a refrigerator unless it is specifically designed and approved for such storage. Use only explosion-proof, spark-free refrigerators for storing flammables. Avoid doing the following: storing large, heavy containers or liquids on high shelves or in high cabinets. Instead, store this at shoulder level or below. Storing bottles on the floor unless they are in some type of secondary containment. Storing chemicals near heat sources in direct sunlight. Storing chemicals in fume hoods. Excessive containers interfere with their flow and hood performance. Only chemicals in actual use should be in the hood. Storing anything on top of cabinets. Ensure at least 18 inches at clearance around all sprinkler heads to avoid interference with the fire suppression system. Using bench top for storage, this workspace should contain only chemicals currently in use. Pay special attention to reactive or dangerous compounds. Dispose of all outdated, hardened, evaporated, or degraded materials promptly. Emergency procedures and first aid. Emergency procedures and first aid are essential components of workplace safety and preparedness aimed at effectively responding to accidents, injuries, or emergency to minimize harm and provide prompt medical assistance. Why emergency procedures and first aid is important? It gives you tools to prevent the situation from becoming worse. Here are some examples of emergency procedures and first aid. The first one is assess the situation. identify physical hazard to own and others' health and safety, minimize immediate risk to health and health safety of the casualty by controlling hazard in accordance with accepted practice. Second one is apply basic first aid technique. Seek first aid assistance from others in a timely manner as appropriate. Third one is communicate details of the incident. Request appropriate medical assistance using the most relevant and appropriate communication mechanism. For the better understanding, emergency procedures and first aid in a laboratory setting are vital for ensuring the safety and well-being of personnel in the event of accidents, injuries, or emergencies.
Hi everyone, I'm going to talk to you about one of the aspects of chemical safety, ventilation and engineering controls. In my part, we will be exploring the role of proper ventilation and engineering controls in reducing exposure to hazardous substances. So let's start. Engineering controls reduce or prevent the hazards from coming into contact with the workers. Engineering controls can include modifying the equipment or the workplace using a protective barriers and ventilation. So ventilation is not just about circulating air, it's about maintaining a safe and healthy environment for workers. Proper ventilation helps control indoor air quality, ensuring the health, safety, and comfort of everyone in the laboratory. So why ventilation is important? A proper ventilation reduces the risk of respiratory problems, allergic reactions, and other health issues, thus creating a safer and healthier work environment. So ventilation controls are probably the most used method to control airborne contaminants in the workplace. And there are several types of ventilation controls and each serves a specific purpose. So one, we have a general ventilation system, local exhaust ventilation system, and fume hoods. So local exhaust ventilation system and fume hoods are designed to capture the contaminants at the source before it reach the worker, minimizing the risk of breathing contaminated air. And next is the fume hoods. Fume hoods are enclosed workspace with its own built-in exhaust system designed to capture the fumes during the laboratory work. And next, we have general ventilation system. This system provides a continuous airflow in the workplace, diluting the contaminated air with a better air quality. So their differences is that local exhaust ventilation and fume hoods targets a specific source, while general ventilation system provides overall circulation. So let's move on to the best practices for reducing exposure. One, we have engineering controls, and next we have workplace design. So workplace design is one of the engineering controls. It includes modifying the workplace by putting a protective barrier to make a safer workspace. And next is PPE or personal protective equipment such as gloves, safety goggles, and laboratory coats. It can reduce the exposure and can protect you to both physical and chemical hazard. And last, we have a comprehensive training. Of course, by providing a comprehensive training or education is also important. Having a knowledge or training about the proper usage of PPEs and other engineering controls can significantly reduce the exposure to hazards. So that's all for my part. Next, let's move on to the personal hygiene and health monitoring.
Greetings, classmates. Today I am going to tackle about personal hygiene and health monitoring. What is personal hygiene and health monitoring? Personal hygiene refers to the practices and behaviors individuals undertake to maintain cleanliness and promote overall health. Health monitoring involves the regular observation and assessment of one's physical and mental well-being to identify any changes or concerns that may arise. When is it being applied? Personal hygiene and health monitoring are applied throughout one's life, starting from infancy, continuing into old age. Number 1. Everyday routine. Number 2. Childhood. Number 3. Adolescence. Number 4. Adulthood. Number 5. Older adults. It is important to apply personal hygiene to our daily life or routine, for it is a must for us to be presentable when we face people and for our own health's sake. Personal hygiene and health monitoring are important for several reasons. Disease prevention, overall health maintenance, self-esteem and confidence, prevention of skin condition and infection, psychological well-being. Importance of good hygiene practices. Disease prevention, health promotion, reducing healthcare costs, improving quality of life, preventing antibiotics resistance. Monitoring and health surveillance. What is health surveillance? Monitoring exposure and health surveillance are two interrelated concepts used in public health and occupational health contexts to track and manage risk to human health. Health surveillance is important for business in a range of industries as they assist in providing employers and with valuable information pertaining to the health of their employees and how their work environment impacts their overall health and well-being. Health surveillance assists in detecting ill health effects at an early stage, allowing employers to introduce better controls to prevent them from getting worse. Providing data to help employers evaluate health risks and their workplace. Enabling employees to raise concerns about how work impacts their overall health. Providing an opportunity to inform employee training and ongoing education. Factors of monitoring and health surveillance. Number one, type of hazard. Number two, exposure pathways. Number three, occupational settings. Number four, environmental factors. Number five, population demographics. Number six, regulatory requirements. Number seven, technological advancements. Number eight, community engagement. Number nine, healthcare infrastructure. Number 10, public awareness and education.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'll be discussing chemical safety in laboratory and industry, historical incident, regulatory requirements for waste management. Importance of chemical safety. We have seven importance of chemical safety. Number one, protecting human health. Proper management prevent poisoning and respiratory issues, reducing the long-term risk like cancer. Number two, preventing incident. Following safety protocol, minimize risk of fire, explosion, spill, and contamination. Avoiding injuries and property damage. Number three, compliance with regulations. Adhering to regulation avoid fines, penalties, and reputation damage. Number four, protecting the environment. Safe practices prevent soil, water, and air contamination, safeguarding our ecosystem and our health. Number five, preserving equipment. Proper handling extend equipment lifespan, reducing corrosion and degradation. Number six, maintaining product quality. Ensure product integrity, reduce defect and contamination risk. Number seven, promoting public confidence. Demonstrating commitment, build trust with stakeholders, showcasing values and priorities. Prioritizing chemical safety is crucial for health, environment, compliance, and stakeholders' trust. Adhering to a safety protocol demonstrate commitment to protection, benefiting all involved. Our second topic is historical incidents and lesson learned. Our first historical incident is in Texas Tech University explosion in 2010. Two students ignored safety protocols. During experiment with nickel, they create 10 grams instead of the allowed 100 milligram. Ignoring warning, they tried to crush the compound, causing a severe explosion. One student sustained burn and lost three fingers, emphasizing the importance of following safety guidelines in lab. Second historical incident. Mercury poisoning laboratory incident in 1997. Karen Waterhan's tragedy died from mercury poisoning after penetrated her gloves despite safety precaution. She experienced symptoms like loss of balance, impaired speech before falling into a coma and passed away. Next, criticality laboratory incident in Los Alamos National Laboratory. Cecil Kelly suffered catastrophic exposure to a neutron and gamma rays. During the critical platinum tank incident, he experienced collapse, dominating, trembling, and skin discoloration due to hypoxia. His condition rapidly deteriorated, leading to his death within 35 hours. And last, the Marburg virus outbreak in 1967. An outbreak at the Marburg laboratory in Germany caused fever, diarrhea, vomiting, and internal bleeding, resulting in 7 deaths. Scientists traced the cause to monkey imported from Uganda carrying the Marburg virus, highlighting the dangers of emergence of pathogens. As we conclude, these incidents underscore the critical importance of stringent safety protocols in laboratory and industrial settings. Lapses in safety can lead to, despite devastating consequences leading to injuries, letalities, environmental damage, and reputation harm. Continuous diligence.
Transportation and storage safety. Safe transportation of hazardous materials. Hazardous materials being transported are in an environment of increased risk, probability, and exposure to spill events. Transportation requirements and best practices. Transportation between buildings should be done by walking and should use indoor corridor connections whenever possible. Transport all hazardous materials using the container with a container concept. Small containers may be carried within an easily handled secondary container. Large containers should be transported in a bucket or in a secondary container on cart. Transport incompatible materials such as corrosives within independent secondary containers. Storage requirements for different chemical classes. Storage requirements for different chemical refers to separate other chemicals to oxidize acids, segregate acids from reactive metals, and to store it safely. Factors of storing chemicals safely. Number 1. Factors of storing chemicals safely. Compatibility. Number 2. Ventilation. Number 3. Temperature control. 4. Containment. Number 5. Labeling and identification. And number 6. Handling procedures. Why is it important? Safety practices play a vital role in the transportation of goods, ensuring not only the protection of valuable cargo but also the well-being of drivers, employees, and the general public. Compatibility and segregation principles. The process of separating of isolating incompatible substances. Why is it important? One of the fundamental rules in dangerous goods storage safety is ensuring that your chemicals are properly segregated. Chemical segregation is when incompatible substances are separated to reduce the risk of the chemicals reacting with each other. Factors. Number 1. Chemical reactivity. Number 2. Storage compatibility. Number 3. Solvent compatibility. Number 4. Temperature and pressure compatibility. Number 5. Hazardous waste segregation. That's all, and thank you for listening.